In today's stories, I want to share something that still feels uncomfortable to remember, not because it was dramatic in the usual sense, but because it was frighteningly ordinary. The kind of situation that could happen to almost anyone on any random evening, where nothing illegal, aggressive, or unusual was happening, yet someone decided to turn it into a full police incident simply because my quiet presence didn't fit into their idea of what normal looked like. It was a weekday evening after a mentally exhausting workday. The kind where your body is still moving, but your mind feels heavy and overstimulated. And instead of going straight home, I pulled into a familiar fast food drive-thru because I wanted something warm, salty, and comforting, not out of hunger alone, but because routine food has a strange way of calming you down after hours of pressure, deadlines, and forced politeness. After getting my order, I didn't head home immediately, choosing instead to drive a few minutes into a nearby residential area where the streets were quiet, lined with parked cars and identical houses, because sometimes sitting alone in your car feels like the only place where no one expects anything from you, where the day can finally slow down without explanation or apology. I parked legally along the curb, turned off the engine, leaned my seat back slightly, and opened the paper bag resting on the passenger seat, with the smell of fries filling the car while the radio played quietly in the background, low enough that it blended into the moment instead of demanding attention, creating a calm, uneventful scene that should have ended right there. As I ate, relaxed and distracted, I became aware of a subtle feeling that something had shifted, the kind of instinctive awareness that tells you you're no longer alone in your own space. And when I glanced toward the nearest house, I noticed the curtain moved just enough to reveal someone standing behind it, watching, then pulling back slightly as if trying not to be seen. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was meaningless, because people glance outside all the time without consequence, and I didn't want to turn a harmless moment into something bigger by reacting. So I kept eating, staring forward, telling myself that this was nothing more than coincidence. A few minutes later, however, the feeling returned, stronger this time, and when I looked again, the curtain was fully parted, revealing a woman standing there with her phone in hand, her posture stiff and alert, as though she had already decided that something about me required investigation rather than understanding. Before I could even finish processing that thought, I heard a car door slam sharply, and when I looked up, I saw her stepping out of her SUV parked in the driveway, already walking toward my car. With deliberate steps, phone clutched tightly, her expression tense with the kind of authority that comes from believing you're about to catch someone doing something wrong. She didn't speak to me at first, instead circling my car slowly, peering through the windows from different angles as if she were inspecting evidence, rather than observing a human being. And with every step she took, the situation felt less like curiosity and more like judgment. Uncomfortable with her silence and proximity, I rolled my window down halfway and calmly asked if I could help her, hoping that direct communication would clear whatever misunderstanding had formed in her mind. Before it went any further, she visibly startled at the sound of my voice, then quickly recovered, straightening her posture and narrowing her eyes as she told me that I had been sitting there for a long time, and that people don't normally just sit in their cars in front of other people's homes without a reason. I gestured to the food in my hand and explained that I had stopped to eat after work, expecting that such an ordinary explanation would immediately end the interaction, because nothing about eating fast food in your parked car is unusual in modern life. Instead, she scoffed dismissively, telling me that anyone could say that, her tone implying that my explanation was rehearsed or deceptive, which was the moment I realized she wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for confirmation of a fear she had already decided was justified. She went on to explain that this was a family neighborhood with children, that strangers lingering made her uncomfortable, and that she didn't feel safe, even though I had made no movement toward her home, no attempt to speak to anyone else, and no indication that I was paying attention to anything other than my food. I responded calmly that I was on a public street and not breaking any laws, hoping logic might ground the situation, but instead of replying, she stepped back, raised her phone, and began calling 911 while standing just far enough away that she could still keep me in view, speaking loudly enough for me to hear every word she said, as she described me to the dispatcher as a suspicious man sitting outside her house. For an extended period of time, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I understood how quickly reality can be rewritten once someone frames you as a threat. I remained in my car, hands visible, movements minimal, knowing that leaving would look like guilt and arguing would only escalate things, while her front door opened again and a man stepped outside, clearly her husband, who immediately adopted the same defensive posture without asking for context. She told him that I had been watching the house, a statement that was completely false but delivered with enough confidence that it instantly became the dominant narrative. And when I tried to correct her, he cut me off, asking why I hadn't simply left if I had nothing to hide. As neighbors began to notice the growing tension, curtains shifted, doors cracked open, and the quiet street slowly transformed into an audience, with me at the center of a story that no longer belonged to me, where silence was interpreted as guilt and calmness was seen as suspicious. When the police car finally arrived, its lights reflecting off the nearby houses, the officer approached the couple first, listening as the woman spoke animatedly, pointing toward me and my car as if she were presenting evidence rather than opinions. When the officer eventually came to my window and asked what I was doing, I explained everything clearly and calmly, describing my workday, the drive-thru, and my decision to stop briefly before going home, all while feeling the weight of having to justify an act that required no justification. He asked for my identification, which I provided without hesitation, though the act itself felt deeply unfair, because it symbolized how easily someone else's discomfort can turn into authority over your existence. While the officer returned to his vehicle to check my information, the woman watched from the sidewalk with her arms crossed, her expression rigid with expectation, as though she were waiting for validation rather than resolution. When the officer returned and handed my ID back, explaining that I had done nothing illegal and was free to go, the relief I felt was quickly replaced by disbelief when she protested, asking if I was really allowed to stay there. The officer calmly explained that sitting in a parked car on a public street was not a crime, and that no further action was necessary. But even as the situation officially ended, the damage had already been done. As I started my car and drove away, not because I had to, but because I no longer felt safe remaining there, I saw the husband shake his head and mutter something under his breath, reinforcing the idea that suspicion doesn't always disappear with facts. Driving home, my food cold and untouched, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily an ordinary moment had been transformed into a threat, how quickly fear had been weaponized, and how comfortable some people are calling the police not to protect themselves, but to control someone they don't understand. That night changed the way I see quiet streets, parked cars, and the fragile line between normal behavior and perceived danger, because all it took was one person deciding that my stillness made her uncomfortable for my entire evening to turn into an investigation. I wasn't hiding, watching, or doing anything suspicious, yet I was treated as if my mere presence required explanation. And that realization stayed with me long after the fries were forgotten. Because the truth is, I didn't break a law, I didn't threaten anyone, and I didn't cross a boundary. I sat in my car, after a long day, eating fries, and for someone else, that was reason enough to call 911.